The Contendings of Horus and Seth, by Egyptian Classical Tales. Brought to you by TellStory.net, stories from around the world. Long ago, before the pharaohs had names to carve into stone, the two lands of Egypt were governed by the gods themselves. The greatest dispute the divine court had ever witnessed would drag on for 80 years, a contest of inheritance fought through trickery, violence, and the slow grinding weight of divine law. Seth, god of storms in the desert, could not bear his brother Osiris's reign. He killed him, then went further, dismembering the body and scattering the pieces across Egypt, as if a man divided could not be made whole again. He did not know Isis. Osiris's wife searched every corner of the land alongside her sister Nephthys, gathered what remained, and through her considerable magic restored Osiris long enough for a child to be conceived. Osiris passed fully into the realm of the dead, where he would rule as lord of the underworld. But he left behind an heir. Horus was born in secret in the marshes of the Delta, raised by his mother among the papyrus reeds, shielded from Seth by isolation and magic until he came of age. When the time came, he appeared before the tribunal of gods to claim what was his by birth and blood. The assembly that convened to hear the case brought together the most powerful forces in creation. Horus, the sun god in his aspect as judge, presided. Beside him sat Thoth, the ibis-headed god of wisdom, whose task was to ensure every word was recorded faithfully. Around them gathered Ta, Khnum, Sobek, and others whose names had been spoken since the first morning of the world. Horus spoke plainly. His father had been the rightful king. Seth had murdered him and seized the throne. Hereditary succession was the established order of things, and the facts of the case were not in dispute. Seth did not deny the murder. He argued fitness instead. A king of Egypt must hold borders and act without hesitation. He called for contests to determine who was truly capable of governing. Here the tribunal ran into an immediate problem that was not Horus and Seth. Horus openly favored Seth, the older, battle-tested warrior god, and made no effort to hide it. Thoth was scandalized.
How can we award this office to Seth while the rightful heir stands before us?
He demanded. Neith, one of the most ancient goddesses in the assembly, sent word that was even more direct: give Horus his father's throne, or she would make the sky fall and the earth crack. Horus's preference did not move. The contest proceeded regardless. The first trial was one of endurance. Both gods transformed into hippopotami and submerged in a sacred lake. Whoever stayed beneath the surface longest would demonstrate the greater endurance. Watching from the bank, Isis grew anxious. She fashioned a copper harpoon and threw it into the water, and struck Horus by mistake. She retrieved the weapon and threw again, this time catching Seth. When Seth called out from the water,
"Sister, would you destroy your own blood for a throne?"
she faltered and withdrew the harpoon. The contest ended without resolution. Horus came out of the lake furious. In his rage, he struck off Isis's head with his knife and fled into the desert. Thoth restored her, replacing the severed head with the horned head of a cow, while the tribunal noted Horus's act with disapproval. Seth tracked Horus into the desert, and found him resting alone and unguarded. What he intended was not a contest in any honest sense. His goal was degradation, to shame his nephew so thoroughly that he could never stand before the tribunal again with dignity. Horus woke before the act could be completed. He caught Seth's seed in his hands and called for his mother. Isis came at once, told him to cast it into the river, then made her own arrangements. She knew Seth visited a garden each morning and ate his fill of the lettuce growing there. Under cover of darkness, Isis went to that garden and spread Horus's seed across the plants Seth would eat at dawn. Seth arrived as expected, ate heartily, and walked away carrying a consequence he knew nothing about. Isis had a second trick ready. She disguised herself as a beautiful widow and crossed to the island of the middle, where Seth had gone after the desert incident. He noticed her immediately and came to speak with her. Isis told him a sorrowful story. Her husband had died, leaving their son to tend the cattle, and now a stranger had arrived and was threatening to take everything and drive her son from his inheritance. Seth was visibly moved.
What kind of man seizes the cattle from the son of the dead owner?
He said, without thinking.
Then judge between us,
Isis said, and let the disguise fall. Seth saw immediately what he had done. He had stated, before a witness, the very principle that condemned his own position. He tried to flee, but Thoth had heard every word. When the tribunal reconvened, Seth came before the assembly with unusual confidence. He suggested, without specifying details, that recent events had demonstrated a kind of dominance over Horus that the court should weigh carefully. Horus let him finish.
Let the seed of the gods be called as witness.
Thoth performed the invocation. Seth's seed declared itself from the direction of the river, washed away, powerless. Then Horus's seed was called, and the answer came from inside Seth himself, alive and growing. Before the assembly had time to absorb this, Seth lurched forward. From his forehead burst a blazing golden solar disk, the unmistakable mark of divine authority. Seth's hand shot out to claim it, but Thoth was already moving. He set the disk on Horus's head, where it shone with the light of legitimate kingship. Seth had gone into the desert to humiliate Horus and had instead produced, from his own body, the proof of Horus's right to rule. Some in the assembly remained undecided. Horus decreed one final test. Each claimant would build a boat and race from the island of the middle to Memphis. The first to arrive would be judged fit to govern. Seth built his vessel from solid stone, disguised by magic to look like timber. His plan was to ram Horus's boat and send it to the bottom. Horus, who had been watching his uncle long enough by now, built his boat from plaster painted to look like stone, light and fast beneath its deceptive surface. At dawn, the two boats pushed off. Seth turned his stone hull directly toward Horus. The ram connected, and Seth's boat went straight to the bottom. Horus's vessel shook and sailed on to Memphis without further contest. Still Ari delayed the official verdict. Neitha's judgment arrived in writing this time, formal and unambiguous. Horus was to be given the throne of his father. Then a message came from Osiris himself, speaking from the underworld. It was not polite. He reminded the tribunal that everything that sustained the living, grain, nourishment, the harvests that fed even the gods, came ultimately from his realm. He had dangerous creatures at his disposal and was prepared to send them upward. He asked the court to explain, in terms he could accept, why justice for his son was proving so difficult to deliver. Horus surveyed the assembly and found no answer left to give. He declared,
The throne of Egypt passes to Horus, rightful heir of Osiris.
Thoth recorded it. Seth was formally stripped of his claim. He was given a new role instead of exile, to stand each night at the prow of Ra's solar bark and fight Apophis, the great serpent that rose from the underworld in its unceasing effort to swallow the sun and unmake creation. The coronation that followed set the pattern for every royal ceremony in Egypt that came after. Ta crafted the double crown, the white of Upper Egypt and the red of Lower Egypt joined into one. Thoth carved the royal names into the cartouches. Horus bestowed the blessing of the sun. Isis placed the crown on Horus's head. Seth took up his post at the prow without argument. He had exhausted every case he could make, every trick he could devise, and none of it had changed the outcome. But Ra had not discarded him. Apophis was a real threat, the nightly battle was real work, and it suited Seth's nature precisely, violent, relentless, requiring a strength that none of the ordered gods possessed in the same measure. In the deep passage of each night, when Apophis rose from the dark with its endless hunger, Seth was there at the prow. Unchanged. Ferocious. And for once, exactly where he was needed,